Welcome to Pastor's Cut, the podcast where we take you behind the pulpit for an inside look at the Eternal Perspective sermon series at Christ Presbyterian Church. Each week I'll be chatting with the pastors who have crafted the messages, diving into the inspiration, the process, and the heart behind their sermons. I'm your host, Melissa Shazer, and today we are having a real unfiltered conversation with Emily Hamilton. Emily, thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
Yeah. It was a great sermon this past Sunday. Would you be willing to give us a snapshot of the sermon that you preached?
Yeah, so we are still in the middle of this series on 2 Corinthians 5, and these few verses 18 to 20, come right on the heels of this big proclamation that Paul makes that people might be familiar with, even if they haven't read this passage, but how Jesus is making everything new. Behold, the old has gone, the new has come. And then Paul kind of builds on that a little bit to say, like, all of this new creation is from God, and how God is reconciling the world to himself through Jesus. And then there's this little word in the very middle of verse 19, and it says, and he has committed the message of reconciliation to all of us. And he desires us to be the people through whom that message of reconciliation is going out in the world. So I talked a little bit about what does that reconciliation mean? And then how does our experience of God's reconciliation and new creation in our lives sort of fling us outward into the world in a way that we get to be part of that new creation, that reconciliation work happening in other places. So really it was sort of focusing in on the connection between our personal transformation and the transformation of the world that we think God is up to.
That's so good. And as we think about reconciliation, I think a lot of different things can come to mind. Mm-hmm. So would you be willing to just define or describe what reconciliation is?
Sure. So there's all kinds of ways that word gets used, both in the New Testament and in our world today. You might think about racial reconciliation or justice and reconciliation. And those are all really important things and really have their connections to a lot of this from the New Testament. And how Paul is talking about reconciliation here, he's talking about God reconciling us to himself through Jesus. And it's this idea of something that was broken being brought back together, or something that is not in right relationship getting back into right relationship. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the time how Paul uses that word is to put God in the active voice with it, like God is doing the reconciling and we are the ones getting reconciled. And so it's this way of saying, like, God is the one getting us back into right relationship with him. It's ultimately not something that we can do. It's something that he does for us. And I like the word reconciliation because I think it helps us take seriously that sin is real. Mm-hmm. Sin is bad for us. Sin causes all kinds of problems in the world, and it's really broken. And God's redemption of it is really big mm-hmm. and encompasses all of that stuff. And he's able to mend all of it, including us. So does that get some of what you were asking
Definitely.
about? Or is there more?
I think so. And even getting into God's the only one who can do it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. It's actually not out of any amount of our good works or any mm-hmm. amount of our striving that we would be able to do that reconciliatory work to put us back in right relationship with God.
Yeah.
But because of God's grace extended to us in Christ, that reconciliation is active and alive and available powerfully because of God's work in our lives.
Yes.
That's
totally.
so good.
Mm-hmm.
You used this infinity wheel image. That's hard to fully describe, but it's this idea that God's reconciling love leads us into this infinity of personal transformation mm-hmm. that makes us ambassadors of reconciliation, mm-hmm. that leads back into personal transformation and back into being ambassadors of reconciliation. Could you describe what inspired that image and kind of the ways that intersects with our lives?
I was trying to get at the idea that the degree to which I think we participate in God's mission in the world is directly connected to the degree to which we are experiencing that transformation in ourselves. And to say that I think for a lot of people, they think, I kind of need to get to a certain spiritual place or a certain spiritual level, and then I'll be ready to be used by God in the world, or then I'll be ready to be out on mission for him. And I think what I like about this infinity loop, which has on it like you said, one side personal transformation, the other side like missional engagement or being an ambassador in the world, is that it shows that I actually think one of the main tools that God desires to use for our personal transformation is when we are stepping out into mission in the world. And that if we don't step out into mission because we've achieved some certain spiritual pinnacle or because we're quote unquote ready, but actually like stepping out into mission is very much going to reveal all of the places where we need the gospel to continue moving in our own lives, where we struggle with sin, where we feel insecure, where we need to remember God's love. And it's this kind of mutually reinforcing movement that we don't really get out of or off of. I think I like it because it's rather than sort of this like upward progression up and to the right movement, it shows that we're sort of always in this movement of moving deeper and deeper into God's love and whatever side we're on. And usually we're in some place of both in our lives practically.
Yeah. It's like as God's reconciling love is prompting transformation in us and prompting deeper faith, that also actually prompts us outward into service and engagement in the world. And then as we intersect with those places, we find ourselves transforming even more, and it feeds. I think the challenge is like if it gets broken.
Yes.
We can sometimes get into these loops where we are only invested in our personal transformation.
Yes.
And so we're consuming Bible studies or worship services or whatever it is that feels like it's feeding us spiritually, but that movement outward isn't happening. Or sometimes it's easier to serve others than to really pay attention to what God's doing in our lives. And so we just want to focus outward on that sphere. Yep. And I will be an ambassador for reconciliation, but I don't actually need to change in this process.
Totally. Yes. Yeah. I was even thinking, I love that you put that way. Because, I think sometimes we're a little bit more comfortable in one space or the other, and we forget that you can't really have one without the other. And I was thinking, too, about this story from Mark about the lame man who is sort of put down before Jesus. His friends tear back the roof. They lower him before Jesus, and Jesus forgives his sins. He heals him, and then at the very end of the story, it says he picked up his mat, the mat that he'd been laying on, the mat that had sort of been the symbol of his need for healing, picked up his mat, and he walked out. And this idea that everywhere he now went to potentially be an ambassador for Jesus and his message, wherever that was, he had this very physical thing that was always showing the personal transformation that he himself had experienced, in the sense that actually like what the world needs from us is for us to be our transformed selves in all these different spaces. Like we don't outgrow that transformation, but it's part of what we offer as the message of reconciliation to the world, is to say, this is my story and how Jesus has made a difference for me. And I'm aware of the brokenness that he's healed and is healing in my own life. And I just love that story about how like he doesn't like leave his mat behind, but he carries it with him out into the places that he's going to move now. And I know we both like Ruth Haley Barton. She talks a lot about how the greatest thing you bring to your leadership or ministry is your own transforming self. So,
absolutely. And I think about those physical, tangible markers as being so powerful for reminding us of the transformative work that God has done, and then teaching others what the power of God looks like. Yeah. When I was in seminary, I went to Vanderbilt and briefly worked at St. Augustine's Episcopal Church, did a very short internship with them, with Becca Stevens, who's a priest there. And one of the things that she has recently talked about is how for the decades of preaching, she has only ever preached barefoot. She never wears shoes. She even went on the Kelly Clarkson show, I believe it was, made the host and everyone there take their shoes off.
How can we do that?
I know. And she talks about how the reason she goes barefoot is because her work has been missional, engaging women who have been vulnerable and exposed to trafficking and homelessness and violence, and often they show up to her barefoot. And in her being barefoot, it's a reminder to her of the missional work that, like, we are all being rescued by God, and that she is on mission to provide tangible physical rescue that mirrors what God has done for her. And so I just think about, like, that's another one of these very physical signs of saying, I am experiencing transformation by God, and I am an ambassador for Christ. And there are physical markers that will remind me of who I am and will remind other people of what he's doing too.
It's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. You named really boldly and in I think a really compelling and challenging way, some of the alternatives to ambassadorship, things that we can tend toward instead of being ambassadors. And you listed assimilating, withdrawal, and bullying as three of the things that we can lean into instead of being ambassadors. I was curious if you could just reflect on each of those. What does that look like? What inspired or provoked those for you?
Yeah. So I can first say a little bit of what has inspired me around that is, that I've led a faith and work cohort here at CPC over the last few years. We're going to be starting a new one in the fall. And in some of the readings and videos that we've used for that, and Reframe is really about helping people connect their faith to their everyday work. And what difference should my faith make in all these different places that I show up, especially places that aren't Christian or where we're not doing ministry. And one of the things that one of the teachers there talks about is sort of the struggle of living our faith out in the world. And he talks about assimilation and withdrawal, assimilation being just becoming too similar to the culture around you, taking on, not looking different in any way, being sort of indistinguishable, unrecognizably the same. And that can look all kinds of different ways. That can look like interpersonally, just the way that we interact. It can also be, I think, a thing that the church more broadly, institutionally can struggle with. Like we want to downplay at times that we have a different way of thinking about things in the world. Withdrawal is sort of the other end of that. Rather than becoming too similar, you sort of pull away too much. You're only on the one side of the infinity loop. You're kind of just in your holy huddle, only hanging out with Christian friends. Sometimes this has also looked more intense institutionally as well, where the church sort of wants to kind of create this like purity culture. We are different than, and we're not engaging. The world is a dangerous place, and we need to make sure we're not contaminated by it. Whereas I think we see in the ministry of Jesus, we see in the way God calls his people over and over again is to be present. It's to be different, but it's to be present. It's not to be absent. And it's to figure out creative ways of engaging. And then a third option that I think I've been really feeling, and maybe in our current cultural moment, is the idea of bullying, where we are so desperate to see God's transformation of the world and Christian change that we'll use very unchristian methods to achieve it. Again, whether that's sort of just being unkind interpersonally to people that we know and love, belittling them for not believing or believing like us. The church, especially when the church has really been aligned with political power historically, this is often a posture that the church has taken on. Well, we're just going to make everybody be Christian, even if we have to use violence to get them to become Christian. And that typically doesn't work super well. And it doesn't lead to the kind of long-term transformation that we most desire. So, again, I think the alternative to being a bully is to be a servant. That's how Jesus shows up. Jesus never makes anybody follow him. Jesus invites people. He shows them a better way. He's not willing to be different, even if it really conflicts with values around him, and even if it makes people mad, but he's not a bully about it. God is not a bully. So I think that's just an important thing as we continue to try to figure out what it means to be faithful Christians in a world where we have a lot of difference and we have a lot of people who don't believe the same as us.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of the things that are happening when we are practicing these alternatives are like, if we are assimilating, we're like thinning out the gospel, we're like watering down the gospel. If we're withdrawing, we isolate, isolating from other communities. And if we're bullying, we're like imposing.
Yes.
Imposing rather than being in relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's good. And I think it's convicting. I also think if we like really dig in to what's going on inside of us, all of us probably have one natural tendency that we move
Totally. Yes.
most easily. And just
Yes.
being able to pay attention and go, oh, that's probably the one that I would lean toward. And I should pay attention to what's happening inside myself as I'm encountering resistance in the world, or as I'm doing this ambassadorial work in whatever way God's calling us to that.
And how is God showing up to me? Like, I love that move inward to go, like, which one is my tendency? And also, where does the gospel meet me there? Where does the gospel meet me with the God who doesn't follow the conventional patterns that I would expect a God to do? How does the gospel meet me with a God that doesn't withdraw, but gets near, with a God that comes near to serve? And how, I think that's a really powerful next step for reflection.
Well, Emily, you had 20 minutes to preach a sermon on a really huge topic. Was there anything that you weren't able to get to that you wish you could have preached on?
Not so much that I didn't get to, but I think maybe what I want to reiterate is I think I wished I could have told more stories about what being an ambassador looks like. And there's a risk in doing that sometimes, because what it looks like is going to look as diverse as there are people and callings out there. But I was thinking, I would love to tell a story about just ways that I've seen individuals or the church take next steps towards being people who embody the message of reconciliation, not just with their words, but with their deeds and in all these different spheres of life. So I think there's a sense in which I would hope people feel a sense of permission and like expansiveness to the message of the gospel that we get to live out in 100 different ways, and also encourage all of us to be on the lookout for the places like, where are you seeing ambassadors at work, and like logging that for yourself, because we need flesh and blood stories and images of what it looks like.
That's so good. How are you seeing that? And then also, where are you not seeing it?
Yeah.
Like, are there gaps? Are there places where you're like, what would it look like for someone to come in with a message of Christ here? That's so good. Well, Emily, thank you. Thank you for this great conversation. We'll be back next week with someone actually who's never been on the podcast before. Joe Bustamante will be joining us.
It's going to be awesome.
It'll be great. So we hope that you'll join us for next week's conversation. Thanks so much.